What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If you are tuning into this right now, that means that the NFL draft has finally finished. We could all breathe a sigh of relief now as the speculation and everything and the expectations, it's all over. There is one thing that we do have to get through, though, and that is the draft grades for all 32 teams. Now, whether you're watching this here on YouTube or listening to me, this is going to be a video on YouTube, and it's going to be an audio playback on all the streaming apps that we're on, especially if you're tired of seeing my face and you want to listen to this. You could just go to one of those apps, Spotify, Apple Podcast, all those big streaming platforms. We're all on every single one of them. So I wouldn't blame you if you were tired of my face. You've seen it about 4 or 5 times already this week. It's been a crazy uploading week. Go to one of those and you could listen on as well. Either way, thank you for the support. I appreciate it throughout this whole draft process. We're finally getting towards the end. It's amazing. It's been a heck of a ride. So, to make the content, and this is really my first time really going in depth and making content like this and trying to get out as much as possible. And I had a heck of a time doing it. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. And if you look here on the left side of my screen, you have the tiers of A+, A, B, C, and D. Now, yesterday, if you watched my first round report card, if that's what you want to call it, I did have an F in there and there was no A+. I don't believe in giving Fs for total draft classes. I think that with every single draft class, unless you're a Jet fan, you at least hit on 1 or 2 of those prospects, depending on how many picks you have. So I don't really believe in a total F. I don't think any professional completely whiffs on an entire draft class. That's just my opinion. And before we get into this, I just want you guys to know this is all opinion based. You're going to see a lot of B's and C's, maybe a lot of A's too. I don't really remember what it is. I have all the grades on my phone here, and I'm also not going to be talking about every single prospect because we'd be here for hours on end. So really, I wanted to highlight, when I'm giving grades, I wanted to highlight the players that I think will make the biggest impact on the team that drafted them. So that's really what I'm basing it off of. I also have my biggest needs for the team. And the way that I kind of formulate these grades is I look at the players and I look at the talent, and then I look at the needs that the teams had. And if the talent exceeds the needs of the team, say like, for instance, you go to Atlanta, did they really need a tight end? Maybe not, but they took Kyle Pitts, who is arguably the second best prospect in the entire draft. So obviously that would be an A of a pick because he's just that good. So things like that factor in. But without further ado, we're going to try and go into alphabetical order. I know I messed up the alphabetical order, which makes no sense because I Googled it beforehand. It's been a long week, everyone. I apologize. But the first team I want to talk about here is the Arizona Cardinals. And I had their biggest needs at tight end, defensive line, and cornerback. They had a great offseason. J.J. Watt, A.J. Green, all those type of guys. They traded for Rodney Hudson. And then you look at their picks. The first round, I think I gave it a C the other day. I love Zaven Collins as a player. I don't really know what Arizona was thinking. They have so many more needs than linebacker, and they took Zaven Collins. Maybe they're just banking on him, bookending the other side with Isaiah Simmons. I mean, maybe it's coming from a financial standpoint where they can cut Jordan Hicks, like I said yesterday, for $6 million after this season. Maybe that's what they're thinking about. And there's also no business why a man Zaven Collins' size should move the way he does at 270 pounds. I like the player, don't necessarily like the pick. Another one I wanted to highlight is Rondell Moore. I like that pick as well. A similar situation where I like the player, I don't really like the pick. They have a surplus of wide receivers now. They have DeAndre Hopkins, they have AJ Green, they have Christian Kirk, Andy Isabella. They have Hakeem Butler from last year's draft as well. I don't really understand that pick either. It might be just because the talent is too good to pass up. I can understand that. And then they finally addressed some of their needs with the other 2 picks I'm going to talk about, and that's cornerback from Florida, Marco Wilson, and then from UCF, Tay Gowan. I like both of those picks a lot. I don't really think it's enough to save this draft more than, they didn't really meet any of the needs that they had. I gave them a C+ because I don't really like the picks for the team. If this was another team, maybe it would be different, but Zaven Collins and Rondell Moore don't really make a ton of sense for me for the Arizona Cardinals. So where are the Arizona Cardinals? Right here. I gave them a C plus, so they'll be over here. Let me move myself out of the way off to the side. The next team up is the Atlanta Falcons. I had their biggest needs at edge, cornerback, and safety. And obviously, like I just said before, they picked Kyle Pitts with the 4th overall pick. That's an automatic A. No matter what team he was going to be an A. The guy just looks like he's going to be an all-pro from the beginning. And then I really like the next couple picks. They took Richie Grant, who is a plug-and-play starter immediately in that secondary, and then Jalen Mayfield. Now, Jalen Mayfield's an interesting prospect. A lot of people had him fringed in the 1st round. He did fall to the 3rd round. I could be wrong about that, only because I was at the Yankee game last night, and I wasn't really paying attention to the draft, so I did more of my research as I was writing these lists out. But Mayfield is interesting because he could play tackle, he could also play guard, and they can move him everywhere around that line, so that versatility is really important, especially when you're trying to protect the 36-year-old Matt Ryan. So I like that. I like that pick a lot too. Then a couple picks I just wanted to talk about was Darren Hall. That's a nice little 4th round get. And then Drew Dahlman as well. He's another offensive lineman, good depth piece there. All in all, I think considering the fact that they didn't have a lot of money to work with either, like in free agency, and really their offseason was relying on what they did in the draft, I think that they did a superb job for what they had. I gave the Atlanta Falcons a B+. So if we move that right over here. Perfect, there we go. And then the next team up is the Buffalo Bills. Now, I said the Buffalo Bills. Biggest needs was defensive line, like interior defensive linemen, edge rushers, and cornerback. Mainly on defense was most of their needs because it was, as we saw last year, their offense was really good. Maybe they could have used a running back, maybe in like the 2nd or 3rd round, maybe, because I don't really believe in Devin Singletary or Zach Moss, but mainly everything was on the defensive side. So they started off really hot in the 1st round. They took Gregory Rousseau. He had a little bit of a slide there. And then they backed it up by taking Carlos Basham Jr. as well, another defensive end. So they really just bookend their future defensive ends, hopefully, if they both meet their expectations. And then they followed it up with offensive tackle from Northern Iowa, Spencer Brown. And then the last prospect I wanted to talk about was Tommy Doyle as well. Tommy Doyle is humongous, by the way, 6'8", 320 pounds. Could be a really, really nice find in the back part of the draft, in day 3 of the draft. All in all, I don't really know how much I like defensive end, offensive tackle when, you know, besides Richard Davius White and maybe Levi Wallace, you have a hole at cornerback. And then the interior, I guess they can get away with it. They still have Vernon Butler, I believe, and they still have Ed Oliver, obviously. So I guess they can get away with that. They really did need some edge rushing there because Mario Addison was their top pass rusher last year with 5.5 sacks. I gave them a B-. I thought that this was a solid draft class. I didn't think it was anything too spectacular. They're just banking off of Rousseau's potential. He opted out of last year, and then the year before that he had 15.5 sacks, but he's also pretty slow. I think he ran a 4.7 or 4.8 40-yard dash. So they're just banking on the fact that his game can translate from college to the pros. And then the next team I have after that, and man, I mean, I've only covered 2 drafts on this channel because we've only been around since the beginning of 2020, but the Baltimore Ravens really, really know how to draft. I've never really thought about it until just now. I mean, yes, they did trade Orlando Brown. They did get a 1st-round pick out of it. They drafted Rashad Bateman in the 1st round and Jason Owe. Then they followed it up with Ben Cleveland, Brandon Stevens, and I love the Tylan Wallace pick. I absolutely love that pick. I think that they did a fantastic job. This draft for me, honestly, was more about getting some more help for Lamar Jackson, and I think in getting Ben Cleveland, who could be a tackle but is more of like an interior guy, that's some great protection right there. And then getting Rashad Bateman and Tylan Wallace on the outside. Tylan Wallace is a great versatile weapon, and then you have Rashad Bateman, who's a big body route technician who can make the contested catches. So I think they really did a superb job in those prospects that I highlighted in helping Lamar Jackson. I gave them an A because I thought that they basically hit most of their needs that they really needed. I don't think I said it. I had their biggest needs at wide receiver, offensive tackle, and edge. So maybe Cleveland can kick out to play tackle. Maybe not. We'll see as it goes along. But I think they did a really, really good job for what they had. Next after that, we have the Carolina Panthers. I had their biggest needs at quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, and cornerback as well. And I remember specifically, I wasn't in love with their first round pick. I think I gave it a C yesterday. I love J.C. Horn as a prospect, number 8 overall and the first cornerback off the board. I wasn't really a big fan of, especially when you have, I didn't think that they were ever really high on Mac Jones, but especially when you have Justin Fields sitting there and waiting. I thought for sure that if Justin Fields fell to Carolina at number 8, they were going to take him, but they stuck to their guns. They took J.C. Horn. J.C. Horn's a great fit in their defensive scheme. That fills a huge need. A lot of people, I heard very mixed reviews on J.C. Horn. From what I see, I think he was the second best cornerback prospect in the entire draft, behind Patrick Surtain. We'll get to him in a minute. And then a couple people had him as like a fringe first round pick, which that I didn't understand. A couple of GMs I was reading said they don't even think he's a first round talent. So I in retrospect, I like the J.C. Horn pick. I just think for who was left on the board, I wasn't a big fan of it at the time, and it was a definite surprise. But then they followed it up with a great pick later on in the second round, getting Terrace Marshall Jr. for Sam Darnold. So I guess, now that they traded Teddy Bridgewater and they didn't take Justin Fields, Sam Darnold is their guy, and they really look like they're committed to building a team around him. Terrace Marshall, for me, I had him mocked throughout all my mock drafts in the first round to the Baltimore Ravens. And I mean, what a pickup. I mean, that's going to be fantastic. That is a speedster who is big, that could make 50-50 catches down the field. I think that's going to be a huge get for that offense and Sam Darnold. Then you get Brady Christensen, Tommy Tremble, which is awesome too, tight end. And then an interesting pick was Chuba Hubbard. I was interested in that as well. Then I realized that they lost Mike Davis in the offseason, and with the injury concerns from last year with Christian McCaffrey, I think that's a solid backup for him. And then they shored up the defensive line with a later round pick in Davion Nixon. I like that a lot. And then they took a flyer in the 6th round with Deontay Brown. Now, Deontay Brown, if you remember, was kind of memed out towards the back end of the college football season. He was that gigantic player on Alabama's offensive line that they were like, Jesus, who is this guy, and why is he not getting, first round recognition? Deontay Brown has a little bit of a trouble with his weight. So if he can maintain his weight and, get his footwork right, he might be an absolutely fantastic pick in the later rounds. But right now it just looks like a flyer. But I really like the idea of taking a flyer on Brown, maybe someone that you could mold. Clearly, if you're looking at some of these picks and you're looking at the trades that the Carolina Panthers have made, Joe Brady and Matt Rule, I forgot his name for a second, really have the confidence in their abilities to mold a lot of these prospects. I gave them an A-. I think that they did a really good job. Like I said, the J.C. Horn pick I really wasn't a fan of, but everything else really made up for it. So then after the Carolina Panthers, you have the Cincinnati Bengals here, and I had their biggest needs at wide receiver, basically the entire offensive line, and edge rusher. You could have thrown a cornerback in there too. And then they went and took Jamar Chase with the 5th overall pick, and I don't know how much of a factor Joe Burrow was in that pick, but I think it's great. I think, first off, Jamar Chase, I think, was the best. I think a lot of people thought was the best wide receiver prospect in this entire draft. So, yes, they did need a wide receiver. Did they need it that bad that they overlooked Penei Sewell to draft Jamar Chase? I think that that's a mistake in the long run, because they also tried to cover it up and take some Jackson Carman, and then they took Deontay Smith as well. So they didn't really do a great job in filling the holes that they needed on the offensive line. That offensive line was consistently bottom 5 last year, no matter what they put out there. Jonah Williams doesn't really look like the offensive line prospect that we thought he was going to be. They followed up with a couple decent picks. They took Cameron Sample and Joseph Osai. I like those picks. They filled their need at edge, at least for now, or at least it looks like it, depth pieces wise. And then the last pick I wanted to talk about was the first kicker taken off the board, Evan McPherson. I like that pick because the Bengals have had kicking problems for a really long time now. So hopefully, I think they spent a 5th round pick on him. So hopefully using a 5th round pick on a kicker can solve their problems for a while. I gave them a C though. I wasn't really a fit. Like the whole Jamar Chase thing just put a whole damper on the draft class for me, to be honest with you, because they could have done things so differently. If you just take Jamar Chase out of that equation and put Penei Sewell there, they could do every single pick differently. So obviously when people are going to come back to this, when Jamar Chase has 1,700 receiving yards in his rookie year, they're going to be like, oh yeah, he was really a bad pick. But in retrospect, what we're looking at right now is, yes, it really isn't the smartest pick. I'm not going to say it's a bad pick. It isn't the smartest pick, though, in my opinion. But I gave them a C because I think that they did a quality job. I like Carmen. I like the Osai pick, and I like the McPherson pick, to be honest with you. I love kickers. So I like that, but I gave them a C because they didn't really do. This draft was supposed to be about protecting Joe Burrow, and I think that they did a subpar job at doing that at best. And then the next team I want to talk about here, going in somewhat alphabetical order, is the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns, in my opinion, if you take the offseason as a whole, as an entirety, and you ball it up into one grade, I think the Cleveland Browns have the best offseason of any team in the NFL. The Cleveland Browns just let the board fall to them. They didn't do anything. They didn't trade down. They didn't trade up. They just kind of sat there and they were like, you know what? We're in a good situation where believe me when I say this, the Browns have one of the deepest rosters in football. So any talent that was going to fall to them was just going to be a plus. And then in the first round, Greg Newsome fell to them. I didn't think he was going to go that far in the first round. I thought he was going to get swallowed up by Tennessee or the Jets if he fell to one of those guys, but they just let him fall. Greg Newsome gets picked up for that secondary, and then they follow that up with two fantastic picks with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who fills a humongous need. That was their number one need for me. Oh, I never told you what their needs were. I'm really fumbling this right here. I had them as defensive line, edge, and linebacker. So that fills their biggest need, in my opinion. They desperately needed some athleticism, some playmaking in the linebacker position. And then I love the Anthony Schwartz pick. He's a burner. He's going to be that downfield option for Baker Mayfield. I love that. I love that pick. And then they followed it up with two really good picks as well, with James Hudson and Richard LeCounte too. LeCounte could have easily been a second or third round pick, but he fell to day 3 because of his really, really slow 40 time, and for a safety, a 4.8 is pretty atrocious, and you probably will never make it in the NFL like that. But they're banking on the fact that he had a motorcycle accident. I think it was midway through the season, so that could have affected his 40. Once he gets fully healthy, he could be one of the steals of day 3. I just think that the Browns have really just turned their entire franchise around. And I didn't have them as an A+, but now that I'm thinking about it, the way that the board fell to them, I'm going to give it an A+. I had it as an A, but you know what? I think they deserve it. After years of everyone just crapping on them, I think that they need credit where credit is due, and they have done a fantastic job in turning this franchise around the last couple of years. Another team that I destroy constantly on this channel because, frankly, they deserve it, is the Chicago Bears. I didn't know what the hell the Bears were doing this offseason between cutting players and just not really signing anyone and signing Andy Dalton to a $10 million deal. I don't know what the hell they were doing. It looked like they were going to be one of the biggest losers of the offseason. And then you look at what they did in this draft, and I'm only going to talk about 3 picks because really they only had 4 or 5, to be honest with you. And you look at it, they traded up for Justin Fields. And right then and there, doesn't matter what their other picks were, this draft should be an A+ because they finally found their franchise quarterback. I'm not going to lie, towards the draft, I am a Jet fan if whoever's watching doesn't know. I was very torn. I was leaning more towards Zach Wilson because I think he was somewhat of a better fit in Mike LaFleur's offensive system. But I always thought that the way that the board fell was Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson. So for him to fall to who would have known how far he would have fell if the Chicago Bears didn't trade up and make that pick. And they didn't necessarily give up that much. Yes, they did give up a 1st round pick and a 5th round pick next year. But in terms of this year, they only gave up a 4th, I believe it was, or I might have those mixed up. It might have been a 5th this year and a 4th next year. Either way, I just think that was they did what they had to do. and they got their franchise quarterback. And now Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace look that much more safe for at least a little while. And then they followed it up with my favorite prospect of the entire draft was Tevin Jenkins. I wanted, if the Jets stayed at 23, I wanted them to take Tevin Jenkins in the worst way. And the fact that he fell to the second round and he fell to the Bears, who now have a new franchise quarterback, now have a new franchise left tackle as well. Just a superb job. And then the last pick that I want to talk about was Larry Borum as well. Larry Borum is another that could be quality depth right there on the outside. Just fantastic overall. I gave them an A, 100%. The Bears did a fantastic job in this draft with the little amount of picks that they had. I think they did great. And then after that, we have the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, I had their biggest needs at tight end, edge, cornerback, and safety. And I think that they did a pretty decent job. It started off kind of rocky. I was like 50-50 on the Micah Parsons pick, but they desperately need some more athleticism at that linebacker position. Then my favorite pick for them was Kelvin Joseph in the second round, the cornerback from Kentucky. Great pick. That's going to be a fantastic pickup for that secondary. Then, excuse me if I say this name wrong. I've been practicing this name all day, and I just can't seem to get it right. So now I'm going to sound like a fool here and saying Osa Odinga Zua. I really apologize if I said that wrong, but that's a solid pickup on the defensive line as well in the later rounds. And then Jabril Cox as well they're just stacked at linebacker now. You got Jabril Cox, Leighton Van Der Esch, Jalen Smith, and you have Micah Parsons as well. They should have the most athletic linebacking core of anyone in the NFL. So I really think that they did a solid job. I give them a B-, only because, like I said, I was just very iffy on where are the Cowboys? Right here. On the Micah Parsons pick. But now that I think about it, the more I like it. But I'll keep them at a B- for now. We'll see how it plays out. Then after that, I have the Denver Broncos. I had their biggest needs at quarterback, offensive tackle, and linebacker. And I think their biggest need, besides for quarterback, because obviously that is the most important position in football. Everyone knows that. Their biggest need was at linebacker for me. And in the first round, they took Patrick Surtain, and that I wasn't really high on that pick. This is another situation where I 100% love the player. I don't love the pick. And the only reason I don't love the pick is because that is their arguably strongest area on their entire team is their secondary and their cornerback room. Yes, I know Bryce Callahan is injury prone and he's a free agent after this year, but they just locked up Ronald Darby and they have Kyle Fuller as well. So, I don't really see how he fits. Maybe he pushes Bryce Callahan out of a job and they move Fuller to the slot and he plays on the outside because he's big. Patrick Surtain is a big man. So I don't really know how that'll work out, and especially with Justin Fields still on the board too. I wasn't really a big fan of that, especially with a team where you're going into the season with your two quarterbacks as Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater, and you feel absolutely comfortable with that you passed up on a franchise quarterback for a cornerback. Wasn't really a fan of that pick, but they definitely made up for it. They definitely had a great day 2 and day 3. They took Javonte Williams. That's a solid 1-2 punch with Melvin Gordon. They took Quinn Miernes as well. Was he the Division 3? He was the Division 3 prospect that flew up the draft boards and everything. I think it was Wisconsin Whitewater he went to in college. He was a offensive tackle who really lit up the Senior Bowl. And then they took Baron Browning, which I really like. That fills an athletic linebacker spot on their team immensely. Baron Browning was a really good day 2 pick. And then they followed it up in day 3 with Caden Stearns. Now that's a really, really good backup safety for Justin Simmons. I really liked Caden Stearns. He came 3 snaps short of 1,000 defensive snaps, I think it was, or something like that. And I think he only played 3 years. So he definitely has the experience, and he's going to be an absolutely solid backup safety. So I gave them a B. The Surtain pick just kind of it sours it a little bit for me. I think that they could have potentially won the draft if they took Justin Fields. They didn't even have to trade up for Justin Fields. So that was a little bit questionable for me. The next team is the Detroit Lions, and basically whatever comes to mind you think that they need, they probably need it. I had their biggest needs at wide receiver, interior defensive lineman, edge rushers, linebacker, cornerback, and safety. Their defense is an absolute mess right now. It's looking more and more every day like Jeff Okudah really wasn't the move at number 3 overall last year. That's how desperate they were for a cornerback. But they took the best player on the board at number 7. Penei Sewell just fell into their lap, and you don't pass up on Penei Sewell when you don't think that you're going to get him. Regardless of what your offensive line looks like, he is one of the best prospects in the longest time that I can remember. So you're going to take Penei Sewell. So they got off to a hot start there. Then it was defensive lineman Levi Onwuzu. Guys, I'm really sorry. Sometimes I just have a block with these names. Onwuzurike, I think his name was. Just an absolutely awful job of pronouncing that name. I apologize for that. Another great interior defensive lineman right there. He's a space eater. Then Alan McNeil as well. And then I'm not even going to attempt to say his name to make more of a fool out of myself. If you're a draft guy like I am, you know that the cornerback from Syracuse was going to be a solid day 2 pick, and that's exactly who they took. And then they took Amon-Ra St. Brown as well, which is really solid. They got him in the 4th round too. That's a nice weapon for Jared Goff on the outside. I really like the Detroit Lions draft. I think they did a solid job. This is Dan Campbell's first draft, and he is going to eat the legs of the competition. But I think they did, in all seriousness, they did a good job. I gave them a B+. I think it was absolutely solid of a draft for all the prospects that I did mention. Then moving on is the Green Bay Packers. Yesterday, I gave the Eric Stokes pick a D, and it wasn't because of Eric Stokes at all. I think Eric Stokes is a fantastic prospect. He's a burner. He ran, a 4.2, like a 4.25 or something like that at his pro day. He's 6'4", 194 pounds. There's no reason why a man who's 6'4" should run that fast. He's an incredible athlete. I just think with the whole drama that has been going on with the Green Bay Packers, that basically where it's a him or me situation with Aaron Rodgers and the GM, where Aaron Rodgers wants the GM fired for him to stay, and if he's not fired, that he wants to leave. And the GM's just like, you know what? Like, you're calling for my job. I'm going to take a cornerback instead of maybe getting you a weapon, because that's just what I'm going to do. It is pettiness, in my opinion. But Stokes as a prospect himself, I really do think that he's going to be good opposite Jair Alexander. Moving on to the other picks that they made that I wanted to talk about real quick. I really like Josh Myers, and I really like Royce Newman as well. I think that's solid additions. Josh Myers is probably going to play center, and Royce Newman probably will be a backup and maybe be worked in as a guard. And then Amari Rodgers, that's a nice pickup. I really like that as well. I think that it sucks because this draft is just going to be known as like the draft where Aaron Rodgers wanted out, like literally 30 minutes before the draft started. So that's really all it's going to be known for. I think that overall, if you just look at it in its entirety and you look at what they actually needed, I think they did a solid job. I gave them a C though, only because just the whole Aaron Rodgers thing is just like right over their head. I can't shake it with this. I don't think that that's going to end really well. We'll see within the next couple weeks. Of course, as the draft season comes to an end and you're thinking, oh, well, there'll be a little bit of a lull, in NFL news and stuff like that. Bam, Aaron Rodgers wants out of Green Bay. So they really know how to keep themselves relevant. Then, of course, after the Green Bay Packers, in my alphabetical order, is the Houston Texans. And their biggest needs for me was quarterback, wide receiver, defensive line, and edge. Now, the first pick, they didn't have a pick until round 3. The first pick here was really interesting because now as the developments come out, where I think it was Ian Rappaport or Adam Schefter reported that Deshaun Watson, because of the unfortunate sexual assault allegations, might not play this year. So signing Tyrod Taylor and then drafting Davis Mills, who I thought was actually a first-round talent. I'll be the first to admit it. Even though he got drafted in the 3rd round, I thought he was a first-round talent. It makes it that much more important. And then they got the wide receiver from Memphis, Nico Collins, who is a red zone nightmare. They took Brevin Jordan, who fell, I think it was to the 4th or 5th round. I don't really remember, even though I was watching. Tells you how burnt out I am from this draft season. Automatic plug and play, could be a Pro Bowler. He is a great pass catcher. He can block as well. The fact that he fell as far as he did was kind of not worrisome, but interesting to me. And then they traded up and got Garrett Wallow as well, who's a really solid linebacker. I think they did a good job. This is another team where I categorize kind of like with the Detroit Lions, where it was like they're just in such a bad spot because their roster is so bad that anything that they do, people are going to say, oh, well, it's not enough. Of course it's not enough. This is not a 1 year thing. This is going to be a rebuild. So I think they got off to a really solid start. I like the picks a lot. I gave them a B. I thought it was absolutely solid from this team, 100%. Then here comes my biggest letdown. I talk up the Indianapolis Colts as much as I can, and I still believe Chris Ballard and co. are the best front office or one of the best front offices in football. But they really let me down during this draft. I had their biggest needs at wide receiver, tackle, and edge, and they did take Kwity Paye with the 21st overall pick. I like Paye. I don't think that he is as good as a pass rusher as he is a run defender. What they need is pass rushing. So I don't think they're going to get that out of him right away. I think there was other guys that were on the board that they probably could have taken a shot at that would have been more productive right away than Kwity Paye. And then the only other guy that I want to talk about was Sean Davis. I like that pick, actually. The safety from Florida. That's pretty solid depth choice there. But they didn't really address the offensive line at all. And they didn't address wide receiver at all, really, either, anyone noteworthy. So I did give them actually a D, and that pains me to say because I'm just such a big fan of the way that the Indianapolis Colts run their organization. I think that they whiffed on this draft. Besides for Kwity Paye, I think he is going to be a good player, maybe just not right away. But I feel like at a team like the Indianapolis Colts, where you're just so close to contending for a Super Bowl every single year, wouldn't you want to get your needs out of the way just so you can contend that much faster? I wasn't really a fan of their draft class, so that's why they are the first D of the grade so far. And then the Kansas City Chiefs are up next, and the rich just get richer, of course. They had some draft, let me tell you. Obviously, no first-round pick. They just acquired Orlando Brown. What I really think, my friend brought up a good point the other day during the live stream, Ethan, if you don't remember him, it was Ethan who brought it up, saying that he thinks that the Patrick Mahomes injury to, I think it was his toe or his foot, was much more severe than we once anticipated, because the amount of offensive line help, pardon me, that they have given this guy in the offseason. What is it? They signed Joe Thuney. They signed Kyle Long out of retirement. They traded for Orlando Brown. They drafted Creed Humphrey in the second round. I mean, just this draft, from what I've seen so far, it was Nick Bolton was their first pick. Great linebacker. That's exactly what they need. I had their biggest needs at linebacker, edge rusher, and guard. So Nick Bolton right away, big need right there. He's a commander in the middle of that defense, absolute commander. Creed Humphrey, one of the most athletic interior linemen of this entire class. I'm very jealous of the Kansas City Chiefs. Then after that, they got Joshua Kendo, who is an edge rusher who hasn't put it all together yet. He's an absolutely massive man. He's 6'7". I think he's 258 pounds. Athletic as all can be. If he gets coached up right, he's going to be an absolute force, and that's a great pick later on. I think it was the 4th round he was taken. Then they took Noah Gray as well, and they took Cornell Powell, too. Everyone knows who Cornell Powell is if you followed Clemson football. Really good slot guy. So that could be a really nice backup wide receiver and then eventually turn into a starting wide receiver. I give them an A+. I mean, the Chiefs have just put together a fabulous offseason so far with little resources. I mean, they didn't have much cap. They didn't have much draft capital, and they turned their offensive line into one of the best offensive lines in football, if not the best. So obviously we're not going to know what we get from Creed Humphrey, but we don't know if he's going to play guard or center, but I think he should play center. I think that's where he is the strongest. So either way, I think he's going to be fantastic if he plays guard or center. I'm very jealous of Kansas City. I wanted the Jets to get Creed Humphrey in the worst way. Moving on, another team that I just was not high on at all because their first pick just soured it for me in general, and that's the Las Vegas Raiders. Their first pick at number 17 overall, they had I don't want to say their pick, but there were so many other options at number 17 than Alex Leatherwood. And I don't like the fit. I don't like him, especially with the talent. There was a massive reach. He could have easily been there with their first pick in the second round. So I don't really understand that. The only two picks that really saved their draft class for me, Trayvon Moehrig, obviously, who was the best safety, in my opinion, in the entire class. That is going to upgrade their secondary massively. And then the other pick was another safety in Tyree Gillespie, who fell, I believe, to the 5th round. That's a solid depth. He might even be a starter. I gave them a C+. Those two picks really made their draft class that much better. I know Alex Leatherwood just seems like a typical, like, John Gruden, Mike Mayock pick, where, like, a couple years ago, no one expected him to take Cleveland Farrell. And, of course, there you go. He was the 4th overall pick. Like, they just seem very out of the box, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing a good job. Was not a fan of it at all. So, like I said, the only two picks that saved it for me was Trayvon Moehrig and Tyree Gillespie. And then we move on to probably another one of the biggest winners of the offseason, and that is the Los Angeles Chargers. The Los Angeles Chargers have transformed their offensive line this offseason to protect their number one asset, Justin Herbert. Yesterday, I gave their number one pick, Rashawn Slater, an A+, absolutely, because why wouldn't he be a first round? Why wouldn't he be an A+ at that pick? Can't beat the value. I had their biggest needs going into the draft at tackle, guard, cornerback, and edge, and they pretty much took care of every single need that they had. Obviously, the first pick was Rashawn Slater. Then they come back in the second round, and they take Asante Samuel Jr., fantastic value. Then they get a pair of great pass catchers in Tennessee's Josh Palmer, and then one of the tight ends that I was extremely high on as a pass catcher, and that was Trey McKitty, out of Georgia. Fantastic big body guy. He's going to make a ton of catches. He's going to be a red zone nightmare. They've done a really good job in replacing Hunter Henry with McKitty, and they also signed, oh goodness, I'm drawing a blank on his name, Jared Cook. There you go. And then Chris Rump II and Larry Roundtree II as well. Great depth picks right there. I loved every time they came up on the board. I was excited to see who they were going to take. Absolute A+ for me for the Los Angeles Chargers. Then after that, we have the LA Rams, and the Rams were another team that didn't really have much to work with, but I think they did a solid job with what they had. Now, I had their biggest needs at guard, linebacker, and cornerback. So, of course, they go Tutu Atwell with the first pick that they had, which is a wide receiver out of Louisville. Good pick, though. Fits a Sean McVay system very well. I like that pick a lot, even though it's not necessarily something that they needed with having Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, and Deshaun Jackson. Don't really know how much they need, and Van Jefferson as well. Then the next pick, which I like, was Ernest Jones, solid linebacker. Next pick was Robert Rochelle. I really like the Rochelle pick there. I don't know why he fell as far as he did. Then they took a developmental prospect in Jacob Harris, who I'm pretty sure played. I heard the story, if you guys watched the draft in day 3, there was some kind of story on him where he was a kicker or something like that. Like, he was recruited as a kicker and then played tight end and then moved to wide receiver and then had like a school record, like 15 touchdown receptions in his only year as a wide receiver. He's a massive man. I think they said he's like 6'6", 245. So why not try and turn him into an absolute monster in the red zone? I think that was a pretty good pick. The Rams were in a situation where they could make a luxury pick like that and try and turn him into something spectacular. So I like that pick. I gave them a B- for their draft. I think, like I said, for what they had, they did a solid job. Moving on to the next team here was, of course, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, I wasn't really high. Of course, I'm high on Trevor Lawrence. Who isn't high on Trevor Lawrence? Best prospect in the whole draft, of course, at number 1 overall. And then they took Travis Etienne, which really just makes me believe that they're going to try and make this Clemson 2.0. You know, you bring in a career college coach in Urban Meyer, then you bring in the best quarterback in the draft, and then you bring in one of the best running backs in the draft. That was Trevor Lawrence's battery mate. So I feel like they're just trying to make this Clemson 2.0. Whatever, that's fine with me. I wasn't really a fan of the pick. I'm not really a fan of running backs going in the first round. They have a short shelf life, and they could easily be a bust. Whatever, that's their decision. Then they came back with the first pick in the second round. Great pick there with Tyson Campbell. Really like that. Then their second pick in the second round, they took Walker Little. So they really, really addressed some of their needs in the second and third round. And then they took a nice Safety in the third round in Andre Cisco out of Syracuse. Just really good day 2 picks. Obviously, day 1 was good with Trevor Lawrence, and Travis Etienne is going to be good in the NFL. I firmly believe that. I just don't love him at 25. But the Cisco pick was really good. Walker Little, that's a great move for them right there. And then, of course, Tyson Campbell fills in their number 2 or maybe even their slot cornerback position. So I think they did a good job. What did I have them as? I closed my phone there for a second. I gave them an A because they filled a ton of their needs. Right there they have an A. Moving on to the next team, and that is the Miami Dolphins, who their biggest need was basically just in the trenches. I had offensive tackle, offensive guard, defensive line, and edge rusher. And boy, they did a good job. They really did a good job. Did they get every single one of their needs? No. But they filled it with such talent that how could you be mad at what they did? Their first pick at number 6 overall, they took Jalen Waddle right there, A+. Then they swung around at number 18. They took Jalen Phillips, another fantastic pick. Then in the second round, they took Oregon safety Javon Holland, who a lot of people had. I had him as the number 2 safety. A lot of people had him at number 1 as a great value pick there. And then Liam Eichenberg as well, a nice offensive tackle. And then Hunter Long was another pick that I wanted to talk about as well. Solid backup tight end for Mike Gesicki there. The Dolphins, if you want a blueprint on how do I put this? If you want a blueprint on how to stay competitive and build a winning team, you just look at the Miami Dolphins, stockpiling picks, making smart decisions in free agency. Great job. I gave them an A, hands down. Great job. The Jalen Waddle pick right then and there should be an A, and that should be good enough for the entire draft. Then moving on, you have the Minnesota Vikings. I had their biggest needs at basically any position on the offensive line. Edge rusher and safety as well. You could have thrown cornerback in there as well, but they have a couple really young corners with Cam Dantzler and Jeff Gladney. And then they just signed Patrick Peterson as well. They made one of the moves of the first round. They were at 14. They traded back with the New York Jets to take the 23rd spot. They picked up 2 thirds and gave up a 4th. And they still got the man that they should have drafted to begin with. They got Christian Darrisaw in the first round. Great value at 23. Then they took a little bit of a dip. I wasn't a fan of taking Kellen Mond over Davis Mills. That's just my preference. I think Davis Mills was a better raw prospect than Kellen Mond. Obviously, Kellen Mond is probably the 3rd or 4th most athletic quarterback in the entire class, but I think Davis Mills was just a better prospect overall. Then I like the Chaz Surratt pick as well. They need some linebacker depth. Wyatt Davis was a great pickup for them in the 3rd round. Patrick Jones, an edge rusher from Pitt, another great pick. And then Janoris Robinson is another great pick to keep an eye on. He's going to be something spectacular if he gets coached up properly. And then Emir Smith-Marset, who is probably one of the best route runners in the entire draft. I think that they did a really, really solid job in hitting a lot of the needs that they had. Like the Vikings have done a spectacular job drafting the last couple of years. They had, I think, 12 or 13. I think they had 15 picks last year, actually. And they made the most out of it, and they took the best wide receiver of the class last year in Justin Jefferson. This time, the only thing that kind of brings their grade down for me a little bit is taking Mond. I think they had many more needs, especially with a coach that's not really willing to develop a quarterback in Mike Zimmer. He's on the older side. He's a defensive-minded coach. I didn't really love the pick as their second pick. If he was still there with their second pick in the 3rd round, I would have been okay with it because there was much better prospects at that point, in my opinion. I gave them a B, though. I think they did a really, really solid job in meeting a lot of their needs. So here we go. More Bs. Okay, perfect. And then we move on. I keep closing my phone. I keep forgetting. And then we move on to the New England Patriots after that. They took Mac Jones. They let the board fall to them. Mac Jones went number 15 overall to the Patriots, of course. Then they traded up in round 2 to get falling Christian Barmore. I think that's some great value for Christian Barmore there in the 2nd round. Then they took Ronnie Perkins out of Oklahoma, I believe it was. And then they took Ramondre Stevenson as well. So Stevenson's a really good running back, and I think he flew under the radar. A lot of people had him as his 5th best running back. I agree with as well. I don't think that he was the 5th running back to come off the board, but I really like their picks. They didn't really have many picks to work with, but with the amount of work that they did in free agency, I think that this was just what they needed. I gave them a solid B+ for for their efforts, and it pains me to say it because, damn it, when are these Patriots ever not going to be good? I feel like they're going to be a force to be reckoned with again this upcoming season. And of course, after the New England Patriots here, I have the New Orleans Saints. I had their biggest needs at wide receiver, linebacker, and cornerback, and they just completely deceived everyone by taking Peyton Turner in the first round. I was okay with it yesterday, but the more I think about it, I didn't realize how few picks that the New Orleans Saints actually had, I fell less out of love with the pick. This is a luxury pick for a team that does not have luxury picks. They were cap strapped beyond belief. They got rid of so many players, and you had very few picks to work with. Taking a player where the position already has two starters in Marcus Davenport and Cameron Jordan, not a good idea. Yeah, he could turn into something special and be a rotational pass rusher for now and really, work on his craft. They don't really have time for that, though. So I didn't really understand that pick the more I thought about it. Then they took linebacker Pete Werner. Not bad. That's a decent pick. And then Paulson Adebo as well is a good pick. I like good value there. And then they took Ian Book in the fourth round. I mean, just like this draft is all over the place. I wasn't a fan of it at all. I gave the Saints a D. They continue to lose this offseason, in my opinion, just absolutely all over the place. They made a bad pick, then they made not a bad pick. I shouldn't say Peyton Turner is a bad pick. A pick that didn't make sense. Then they made two good picks back to back in Werner and Adebo, and then he took Ian Book in the fourth round. It's whatever. I'm not a fan. Moving on, and then you have the New York Giants. After that, I had their biggest needs at tackle, guard, linebacker, and edge. And then I straight up was not a fan of Kadarius Toney at number 20. I think that they would have, if they would have waited to 45, where I think their next pick was, he probably still would have been there at 45. So I wasn't a fan of that per se. But then they made up for it with two picks in day two. They took Azeez Ojulari and they took Aaron Robinson as well. Aaron Robinson, a lot of people had as a fringe first round cornerback. I think he's going to prove to be spectacular value in the third round. Same thing with Ojulari too. Ojulari is a fantastic run defender. He always finds himself in the backfield somehow. He penetrates really well. That's exactly what this Giants defense needs. And I think that they did a really, really good job with those other picks. I just, like I said, just was not a fan of Kadarius Toney. So it brings their grade draft. It brings their draft grade down for me. I have them as a B+. Could have easily been an A. Just like I said, wasn't a fan of the Kadarius Toney pick at all at 20. Then after that, we have my New York Jets, who I had their biggest needs as everything under the sun. I literally had it as everything under the sun. But mainly quarterback, guard, cornerback, and linebacker were their biggest needs. And then, of course, with the number 2 overall pick, they took Zach Wilson, and they traded up in the first round, gave up 2 third-round picks for Elijah Vera Tucker, who was probably the best interior offensive lineman in this draft. He's very versatile as well. He doesn't necessarily have to play guard. He probably will play guard for the Jets, but he could also play offensive tackle. And then in the second round, with their only pick of day 2 after the trade, they took Elijah Moore. And I didn't think Elijah Moore was going to fall to them. And I also didn't think, even if he did fall to them, that they were going to take him. So that was a pleasant surprise. That essentially means that Jamison Crowder is gone, because now if you look at their wide receiving core, now they have Corey Davis, Denzel Mims, Elijah Moore, and Keelan Cole. Kind of leaves a $10 million a year Jamison Crowder, the odd man out. So probably within the next few days, you might see him getting cut or traded. Then they took Michael Carter. Big fan of the Michael Carter pick. I love that pick. I think that's going to be really great. He's already more talented than the Michael Pirine, and he's probably just going to fight for snaps with Tevin Coleman. So I really, really like that pick in the fourth round. They really did a good job surrounding Zach Wilson with good pieces for early success. I also don't think that Zach Wilson is going to start day one. That's just me. I don't think he'll be ready to start day one. But I think that they've surrounded him with enough pieces on the offense right now to get the job done what they didn't do for Sam Darnold. I think that he will have – they're still a long way away. They still need a little bit of offensive line help. They need a tight end that can catch the ball. I think that they're still a year away, but this is a really good stepping stone. I gave them a B+. I think that the first round alone gave them a B+. Moving on to the Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles did pretty good. The Eagles are another team that I ripped in the offseason for just being like $750 billion over the cap. I had their biggest needs at wide receiver, cornerback, linebacker, and some offensive line help as well. With the first pick, they moved up. They gave up a third-round pick to move up 2 spots with the Dallas Cowboys. That's fine because it looked like the Giants were going to take Devontae Smith. So they hopped over the Giants, took Devontae Smith, and it actually worked out for the Giants then because they got some draft capital for it. Then in the second round, they took Landon Dickerson, great interior lineman. That was a great pick. And then they took Kenneth Gainwell as well. And then before that, they took Milton Williams, who is a very solid interior defender. I like that pick a lot. He's a space eater. He's a block eater as well. I like that. That's a good pickup for them. Very under the radar. And I like Gainwell a lot. He's going to be a nice compliment to Miles Sanders. Another team, you're going to call me the B+ God, but I mean, very solid for the Philadelphia Eagles. I really liked what they did. Then after the Philadelphia Eagles, obviously you have the San Francisco 49ers and their biggest needs. For me, obviously we all knew that they were going to take a quarterback at number 3 overall, regardless if that was Mac Jones or Trey Lance. This is really for the rest of the draft. I had a wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, and safety. They took Trey Lance. Then they came around in the second round and they took Aaron Banks, solid offensive line prospect there. Then they took Trey Sermon as well. They have like a 4-headed monster in that backfield now. And then they took Ambry Thomas as well. Those are really just the guys that I wanted to touch on. I think in terms of getting some wide receiver help, tight end help, and safety help, they really didn't do that great of a job. But I'm just so in love with the Trey Lance pick, and I'm also in love with the fact that the 49ers had everyone and their mother thinking that they were going to take Mac Jones, and then when Roger Goodell came up and said Trey Lance, everyone was – I wouldn't say everyone was shocked, but there were definitely people that were surprised, especially bettors that bet on Mac Jones too were definitely surprised when they heard that. So I think how close they kept the cards to their chest and how secretive they were, and the fact that they basically surrounded Trey Lance with good pieces. He's probably not going to play this year, but they surrounded him with good future pieces in Trey Sermon and Aaron Banks. I think they did a really good job setting themselves up for the future. I gave them an A- on this. Just put that over there. Get the Miami Dolphins out of the way. Then after that, we have the Seattle Seahawks, and my goodness, what a mess over here. The biggest needs they had was tackle, guard, edge, and cornerback, and they took Dwayne Eskridge with their first pick. I'm not in love with that because wide receiver isn't necessarily a position of need. So, especially they just locked up Tyler Lockett, no pun intended, and they have DK Metcalf as well. Not a fan of the pick, especially when you have so little picks. It doesn't make too much sense to me. And then after that, the other person I want to talk about, they took cornerback Trey Brown, solid slot cornerback. That's all you're going to get from him. He's about 5'9". He's pretty fast. Overall, this grade is purely because of the first pick that they made, and also that they just didn't really do any moving around to get themselves more picks to try and get more talent. I gave them a D because just like the rest of the Seattle Seahawks offseason, just not that good. Then after that, you have the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers' biggest needs, in my opinion, was quarterback, offensive tackle, offensive guard, and running back. That's why I had basically just all offense. You could throw a linebacker in there too. With their first pick, they took Najee Harris. I like Najee Harris as a player. I don't love him in the first round. Like I said, I'm not a fan of running backs in the first round, but he did land in probably the best spot where they will use him the most. He reminds me a lot of Derrick Henry with better receiving skills. So, wow, that's scary if he ever reaches that potential. And then the second round, they took Pat Freiermuth. I think I'm saying that name right. I don't know. I've been having some real trouble with these names this year in the draft. Big tight end from Penn State. Love that. The Ben Roethlisberger and the Steelers love to incorporate the tight end into their offense, so that's a big get for them, especially after Vance McDonald retired. After that, they took Kendrick Green, very solid offensive line prospect. He could probably play. He's probably going to play guard, but probably can play tackle as well. And then they took Big Dan Moore Jr., as well, offensive tackle. And then they swung around in the end of the 6th round and took linebacker Quincy Roche, who fell really far for some reason. I'm not sure why he fell, but I like that pickup for them. They need some linebacker depth. They need some athleticism in the middle of that defense. I like that pick a lot. I gave them a B-. I think that they did a good job, but the Najee Harris pick kind of drops it down just a little bit for me. I think they probably would have had a B anyway if it wasn't Najee Harris. I think they did overall just a very solid job. Then closing out on the last 3, we had the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who at the time of recording, the 3 notable players that I had for them was first round, they took Joe Tryon, okay? Then they took potential Tom Brady successor in Kyle Trask. Not really hating that pick. I kind of like that a lot, and I'll explain in a second. And then they took 5'7" Jalen Darden out of North Texas. Very speedy wide receiver. He's going to be great in the slot if he can get the opportunities. Now, I'll explain. I like the Kyle Trask pick because he reminds me, athleticism-wise, a lot of Tom Brady. And I feel like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are just kind of piggybacking off whatever they get from Tom Brady. So Trask has a similar frame to Brady as well. He's massive, by the way. He's like 6'5", like 240 pounds. Massive. He's immobile, just kind of like how Tom Brady is. And essentially, it seems like once Brady eventually retires when he's 67 years old, they're trying to make Trask into like a Tom Brady 2.0 because the offensive line and the offense is already set up around someone like Tom Brady. So if you just bring in a younger Tom Brady, you don't miss a beat. Now, obviously, no one will ever be Tom Brady, but you kind of get what I'm saying. I like the pick from that standpoint, if that's in fact what they're thinking. I really like that, actually. And then Darden is a really nice pick. I think it was the 4th round. He was picked. Super speedy wide receiver, a little bit tiny, but when he gets in open space, he's as good as gone. What did I give them, everyone? I gave them a B. 100% I gave them a B. They possibly found their successor, and they got another slot guy, and they got a rotational pass rusher in Joe Tryon. Can't hate it. And then the last two teams, the first one of the last 2 is the Tennessee Titans, where I had their biggest need at wide receiver, offensive tackle, offensive guard, and cornerback. In the first round, they took care of that. They took Caleb Farley. He was falling because of the pre-draft back procedure he had and the injury concerns. If he could stay healthy and live up to that potential, that's an absolute steal at number 22. I think it was 22? 22. Then they took tackle Dylan Raduns. I don't know if I'm saying that right again, but I've just completely given up at that point. North Dakota State, FCS prospect. He was the protector of Trey Lance. So there you go. I guess when you're looking at Trey Lance tape, you're like, oh, who's that tackle over there? And that's how you become a prospect, I guess, from an FCS team, right? And then they took Monty Rice. Again, I like Monty Rice as possibly a starter, good depth piece. He brings a ton of athleticism and energy to the middle of that defense. Then they took Elijah Molden. I love these 2 cornerback picks that they made in Caleb Farley and Elijah Molden. I think Molden kind of got subbed a little bit because of the fact that he isn't really your prototypical cornerback. He doesn't really have the size or the speed, but he makes up for it in production, and he was an extremely productive college player at Washington. And if he could just translate his game from college to the pros, he'll be a terrific slot cornerback for that Tennessee defense. The only pick that I had a problem with out of this was Dez Fitzpatrick out of Louisville. They traded up to get him, and they gave up 2 picks. And there was also guys like Tylan Wallace and Amon-Ra St. Brown on the board as well. So I kind of had a problem with that. Maybe he fits their offense a little bit better, but I think that they could have easily just went with one of those 2 other guys and kept 2 picks. And then after that, tremendous value in Rashad Weaver. Really like that pick there. I think that was like the 5th or 6th round that they picked him. I think it was the 5th round that they picked Weaver. So super great value there. I gave them an A. I think that they had a really good draft. A team that was going in with a ton of holes, especially on the defensive side of the ball, did a really good job. And then last but not least is another one of my teams that has become like one of my favorite teams. And it's not just because of Manny Jakuba, who has been on our show a couple times. The Washington football team has had a great offseason and had a great draft. Yeah, you could argue that Jamin Davis was a reach at number 19, but at the same time, if that's your guy and you know that he's going to be gone by the next time that you draft, and you don't want to give up any capital, you go get that man. And they're in a position on defense where they could afford to maybe reach a little bit for someone that they want. I love Davis. I think he's super productive. He's super athletic. He is a dog on that defense. He's going to be fantastic for the Washington football team. Then they come around and they take Samuel Cosme as well. Just they nailed their two biggest needs, besides for quarterback, they nailed their two biggest needs right away in linebacker and tackle. And then they came back around and they took Benjamin St. Juste as well. And then Dyami Brown they took. My God, just like I'm like fangirling over these prospects that they took. They just hit every need except for quarterback that they had at the right time. Dyami Brown is fantastic. No pun intended. He's super dynamic. He's going to be really great for Ryan Fitzpatrick, and he's going to be great across from Terry McLaurin as well. Just overall fantastic. A+, 100% A+ for the Washington football team. I know that's the Redskins there, but this is a little bit old. So I'll give you 2 seconds to look at my grades for the 2021 NFL Draft. We are finally done with the NFL Draft, and I know it might make me sound rude that I'm saying, oh my God, I'm finally done with this. The process has been exhausting. The content drops have been exhausting, but I love doing it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys enjoyed all of my draft stuff. If you did like it, please let me know. I will do even more next year. I was just kind of really getting my feet wet with this. I was kind of testing it out, but now that I have the confidence to really go 100% into this, I will do 100% more of the content. If you guys have any discrepancies or disagreements with the grades, let me know in the comment section below. I know I didn't get to every single prospect of every single team, but like I said, this would probably be a 3 or 4 hour video if I got into depth with every single one of the players. And actually, as we're talking right now, I'm not going to lie to you guys, the draft is actually still going on. We're just closing in. I just got the notification for the 253rd overall pick. So this is going to be out super quick after the actual draft is done. So I really want to get those fast views. That's why I kind of did this early. But thank you so much for watching. Hit that little icon in the lower right-hand corner there, right over here, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Please like the video. It helps me out more than you know. And please comment. Let me know if you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if there's a prospect that you think is going to be spectacular that I didn't mention. Please let me know. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope your team did great in the draft. I will see you in the next video. Have a great day, everyone.
Are you ready? Oh. Is you ready? Ready. You say you ready. Oh. Whole squad ready. Ready. Is you ready? Huh?